All right, folks. This is somewhat old news, but this is the kind of news that ages like wine. This is one of those stories where even if it's a few days old, it's worth doing because this is the kind of story that you could really eat out on for quite some time. So the the publisher at the Washington Post, William Lewis, printed this on the site on October 25th, 11:58 a.m. Eastern Time on political endorsement. A note from the publisher. The Washington Post will not be making an endorsement of a presidential candidate in this election, nor in any future presidential election. We are returning to our roots of not endorsing presidential candidates. Yeah, we are returning to our roots of the owner of our newspaper being invested in cloud computing software and doesn't want to lose out on any more government contracts than he may have already jeopardized. That's the roots of the Washington Post. Yep. See, our owner has bigger fish to fry, and in case Donald Trump becomes president, he doesn't want to lose those government gigs. Of course, he didn't come out and say that explicitly.
The motherfucker literally looks like Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Nobody noticed that he is a real-life supervillain?
Yeah. Yeah. As our editorial board wrote in 1960, then they go on this. I'll read this first paragraph. He writes more about this, but for timing's sake, we'll only read the first part. The Washington Post has not endorsed either candidate, this was 1960, in the presidential campaign. That is in our tradition and accords with our action in 5 of the last 6 elections. The unusual circumstances of the 1952 election led us to make an exception when we endorsed General Eisenhower prior to the nominating conventions and reiterated our endorsement during the campaign. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, he goes on for more paragraphs than that, tries to make it look like this is returning to roots, blah, blah, blah. We recognize that this will be read in a range of ways, including as a tacit endorsement of one candidate or as a condemnation of another, or as an abdication of responsibility. That is inevitable. We don't see it that way. We see it as consistent with the values the Post has always stood for and what we hope for in a leader. Character and courage in service to the American ethic, veneration for the rule of law, and respect for human freedom in all its aspects. We also see it as a statement in support of our readers' ability to make up their own minds on this, the most consequential of American decisions, whom to vote for as the next president. Our job at the Washington Post is to provide, through the newsroom, nonpartisan news for all Americans and thought-provoking reported views from our opinion team to help our readers make up their own minds. Most of all, our job as the newspaper of the capital city of the most important country in the world is to be independent, and that is what we are and will be. So, folks, how do you think the Libs took this? How do you think the Libs took this?
Very well, very well.
Very well, very well, I'm sure. Taking bets. You think they took it very well?
That was like some West Wing shit right there.
All right, folks, here's how the Libs took it. Brooklyn dad defiant, breaking, sounding the alarm. The Paul Revere of shit liberty, Brooklyn dad defiant. Jeff Bezos is forcing the Washington Post not to endorse Kamala Harris for president, just in case Trump wins the election. Everybody cancel his boldface, not mine, your Washington Post subscriptions now. Fuck you, Jeff Bezos. So, they followed. The nice thing about putting together these segments is you know exactly which accounts to search for to get their take, right? Yeah. Like it's now you don't have to do that much research.
Do we have a Takai take?
No, I spared him. I spared Takai because you have personal affection for him. So that's why.
He was nice to me as a young boy.
He was nice to you as a boy, right? Yeah. So I try and be merciful.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. After 5 years, says Stephen King, I have canceled my subscription to the Washington Post. Mark Hamill. Must have a special place in your heart as well, but fuck him. I can only give you one.
Oh, fuck that guy.
Well, you haven't met Mark Hamill. He wasn't nice to you personally as a boy.
He wasn't nice to me personally as a child, though.
Yeah.
No, he was not.
Just canceled the newspaper that told us democracy dies in darkness. Keith Olbermann. Nice try, Jeff Bezos. Trump will still deport Lauren and then put you in the camps with the rest of us. Coward. Not an unhinged take at all. Rob Reiner. The Washington Post editorial board is a disgrace. For the newspaper that exposed the Pentagon Papers and the Watergate scandal to not take a position and endorse a candidate in the most consequential presidential election in 165 years is reprehensible. David Korn from Mother Jones. Democracy dies in the daylight, and when corporate media owners don't give a damn about the threats to democracy. That's right. They are not taking this well. Joan Walsh, I just canceled my subscription to the Washington Post. You should too. And then I love this.
As
in the
Joan
replies.
Walsh goes, so goes the country.
Exactly. I love this though. Dino, a more effective process would be for everyone to stop shopping on Amazon. And Walsh replies, much harder, but considering. I like that.
Look, a word of sense. Now, the most shocking, I mean, not really shocking, but stomach churning aspect of this is the way that all of a sudden they decided to wake up to the fact that the Washington Post is not the Washington Post that broke Watergate or the Pentagon Papers. It is fucking owned by Lex Luthor, which you were fine with. You were fine with until they did something that didn't fit your little narrative.
Right. Until something came before catering to your sensibilities.
Until that's it. You didn't mind. You did not think about the idea, hey, can I really trust a newspaper owned by the owner of Amazon? Can I really trust that newspaper to accurately report intelligence services stories given his contracts with the CIA? Military stories, ditto, given contracts with the CIA. Labor stories, given the horrible labor conditions, legendarily so, at Amazon. Oh, all of a sudden they don't endorse their totem of the week. And now, oh my God, the Washington Post is not an objective newspaper. You didn't give a shit about that last week.
It's crazy when a story like this catches fire. Like, I'm not on Facebook anymore, really. I mean, I post very, very rarely. Family pictures. Sometimes I'll post something political on there every once in a blue moon. But, you know, like you have your Zionist listening posts, I have my Lib listening posts. So I have, you know, certain people who I check on. And the thing that's so funny about the Libs, look, on the left, like the actual left, there are certain like online habits that we should probably break ourselves of, like trying to come out with the hottest take first and one up each other. Like that's a certain gamesmanship in our space that I think we should work on as a community of sorts, right? But they're just the opposite. Like they don't try to one up each other. They just all say the same exact thing. The exact same thing. So like when I looked on Facebook, one of my Lib relatives obviously just canceled my Washington Post, but she took it so far as to like for 2 days straight, she's just sharing every other newspaper endorsement of Kamala Harris that she can find. Like every other major city's newspaper that did endorse. She's like, here, Houston Chronicle endorsed Kamala Harris or whatever. I don't know that for a fact. That's the one. Just using it as an example. Here, this paper endorsed Kamala. This paper endorsed Kamala. It's like in Seinfeld when Jerry finds out that Elaine had faked orgasms and he starts calling all his other ex-girlfriends. Mary Lawrence had them. They had them. She had them. She had them. It's like that. This newspaper back Kamala, this is like, it is just so pitiful. It's so pathetic. I mean, it's just, it would be sad if it wasn't so funny.
I sent you a couple of screenshots from some of my Lib listening posts. What one jackoff actually declared, I have written a letter to the editor. I am outraged. Right. These people are such fucking clowns. They have the political depth of a dinner plate. Their idea of what is worth speaking out about really simply boils down to any challenge to the liberal class narrative. And it's not even the narrative of the elites that they think give a shit about them, and they don't. It's the narrative that they give to the plebs. They don't even realize they're plebs. They think they're in the game. Right. They think they're part of the ruling class. That's part of what's so pathetic about it. They laugh at you. They're laughing at you. And these people, the liberals, they'll point at the Trump people and they'll say, Elon and Trump are laughing at you. And that may very well be true, but point that finger back at yourself.
Right.
Because the same can be said of these people that you admire. You think Rachel Maddow gives a fuck about you? You think Rachel Maddow respects people like you? She thinks you're ridiculous. She thinks you're ridiculous. She would never spend 5 seconds with the kinds of people who watch her show.
Exactly. But the New York Times actually had a report as to how the Washington Post arrived at their decision not to endorse any candidate. Inside the Washington Post's decision to stop presidential endorsement. So this was the Times had an article about this. A tropical storm was headed toward Florida's Gulf Coast in late September when senior news and opinion leaders of the Washington Post flew into Miami for a periodic meeting with Jeff Bezos, the newspaper's billionaire owner. During their visit, which included a working lunch at Mr. Bezos' sprawling home on an exclusive island in Biscayne Bay and dinner at a nearby restaurant, David Shipley, the Post's opinion editor, and Will Lewis, the Post's chief executive and publisher, he's the one who wrote the piece that we just read, discussed plans for the future of the newspaper's opinion section. The election, less than 45 days away, loomed large. By the end of the meeting, according to 4 people familiar with it who spoke on condition of anonymity to relay private conversations, it appeared to Mr. Shipley and Mr. Lewis that Mr. Bezos had reservations about the Post endorsing either candidate in the presidential race, but they also thought he was open to persuasion. Mr. Bezos' ultimate decision to end the Post's decades-long practice of endorsing presidential candidates exploded into public view on Friday, drawing criticism from reporters, editors, and readers, along with an unusual rebuke from the legendary Post journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Now, oddly enough, they did not hyperlink to this in the article. I had to find this myself, but this is retweeted by Bob Woodward, as you could see. So this is the real scoop from Brian Stelter. New statement from Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. We respect the traditional independence of the editorial page, but this decision, 11 days out from the 2024 presidential election, ignores the Washington Post's own overwhelming reportorial evidence on the threat Donald Trump poses to democracy. Under Jeff Bezos' ownership, the Washington Post news operation has used its abundant resources to rigorously investigate the danger and damage a second Trump presidency could cause to the future of American democracy, and that makes this decision even more surprising and disappointing, especially this late in the electoral process. The article continues, it came after additional discussion between Mr. Bezos and the 2 Post leaders, Mr. Shipley and Mr. Lewis, who privately made a case not to abandon the tradition so close to an election. The editorial board had already drafted an endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris, though Mr. Bezos did not read it before his decision, Mr. Lewis said in a statement on Saturday. The decision by Mr. Bezos had been in the making for weeks. It is not clear what motivated his final determination or its timing. Yeah, the timing of this really suggests that he's afraid that Trump is going to win and he doesn't want to be out of favor.
He doesn't want to
because of all of his other business interests. Like if you were going to make this decision, you would make this at the very beginning of the cycle. Hey, just so everybody knows, we're not endorsing anymore. This way there'd be no anticipation a week before the vote. Where are they going to go? You would clear this up earlier if this weren't motivated by the business concerns of the owner, business concerns not pertaining to the publication, but his other business concerns. This is what happens when oligarchs own newspapers. It can bite you in the ass in more ways than one. Now, we've been saying that for a long time. The Libs never cared until now.
Well, and especially with Trump has Elon so far up his ass, he's tickling his tonsils. He's got to worry that whatever contracts he could take from him and give to Elon, he will.
Exactly. Mr. Bezos has clashed repeatedly with Mrs. Harris's electoral opponent, former President Donald Trump, who for years has been openly hostile to him on social media. In 2019, Amazon sued the Trump administration, blaming Mr. Trump's animosity toward Mr. Bezos for its loss of a $10 billion cloud computing contract. There you go. Chris Pavlovsky, CEO of Rumble, was right on this. Let's be honest on how the world works. Jeff Bezos is scared shitless that Amazon Web Service loses favor with the U.S. government, and Oracle and others win favor. Absolutely. This is why he made sure the Washington Post stayed away from endorsing Kamala. Cloud is the profit center of big tech.
Yep,
that's right.
that's
the profit center of Amazon is not the shit they ship to your door. It's about the cloud computing. That is the profit. That's the moneymaker right there. That's the big money. And Bezos feels like he's probably already in danger of losing it, doesn't want to push his luck. If anything, this sends a message to Donald Trump here. You know, I held off. Now, what good that does him, yet to be determined. But that's no doubt where he's coming from. It's the most obvious thing in the world. And the sweet justice of this, as Russell said, was that a lot of people have been screaming for a long time how unhealthy for a democracy it is to have a billionaire oligarch like Jeff Bezos own a major paper of record. And again, they never cared until now, until it bit them in the ass.
The Libs did not give a shit about it. I remember when he bought it, you had all these puff pieces because it's a very neoliberal understanding of the world that would make Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post make sense. The old models of newspapers selling classified ads don't work anymore. So we need a white knight from the new media, from the new technology to come in, and God bless him for rescuing the Washington Post. That was the overall tone. And that is how Libs have treated it ever since. Like he's the white knight who came in and saved. Only somebody making that kind of money could afford to come in and save this storied newspaper. And they really never bothered to ask what it implied about the editorial standards. And they never do. They were perfectly happy with oligarchs owning Twitter. And now all of a sudden it's a problem when it's an oligarch they don't like.
Exactly. 100%. Looks like the mods got that spammer over on Rumble, but if you haven't, please do. Looks like you got him. Thank you. The article continues. The businesses Mr. Bezos founded, including Amazon and Blue Origin, his aerospace company, still compete regularly for lucrative government contracts. Blue Origin executives met with Mr. Trump on Friday, and the company has a $3.4 billion contract with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration to build a lunar lander. Wow, these dollars keep adding up, don't they? They keep adding up.
And that he really has to worry about because you're really getting into Elon's territory.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. In the weeks after Mr. Bezos met with Mr. Shipley and Mr. Lewis, members of the Washington Post editorial board who write editorials for the newspaper, including endorsements, assumed that the Post would be giving their stamp of approval to Mrs. Harris. Two of them had drafted the endorsement, which was awaiting a final sign-off. It never came. The board members were aghast. They grilled him. Why wouldn't the paper endorse? There was little support for the idea among the editorial board, which had not been consulted on the decision, one of the people said. The decision, which was reported by NPR before Mr. Lewis sent his email, generated near instantaneous blowback. Within minutes, Martin Barron, the former Post editor featured in the movie Spotlight, posted on X that it amounted to cowardice with democracy as its casualty. Wow, I bet the Libs love that one. Robert Kagan, an editor-at-large who has written for the Post for more than 2 decades, dashed off a quick resignation email to Mr. Shipley at 12:56 p.m. In an interview, Mr. Kagan said that in his view, the decision to not endorse a candidate was clearly a sign of preemptive favor currying with Mr. Trump, the Republican nominee for president.
And frankly, at the end of the day, what do they think that endorsement would do? Who the fuck who reads the Washington Post was not already voting for Kamala?
That's the other thing. Like, I think, like, on the facts, they're probably right. I mean, they're almost certainly right that Bezos didn't want to sign off on the endorsement because he figures, oh, shit, Trump's likely to win, and look at all of these contracts that are on the line if Trump decides to be vindictive about the fact that I endorse Kamala Harris. I think they're probably right about that. But as you just said, What weight do they think this carries? In 2016, I mean, almost every single major paper went against Trump. They
all endorsed
they
Hillary.
all endorsed Hillary. So, like, what exactly did you think this was going to do? No, it is a religious thing. He committed blasphemy. It's heresy not to endorse Kamala Harris, right? I mean, it like whatever the political implications are is kind of secondary. He did not express the moral virtue that we pay for when we give him $5 a month or whatever. And so their virtue signal now is to screenshot the cancellation email and post it out. As we saw a couple earlier on, I've seen some on Facebook, some of my lib friends, like they're all very, very proud to be canceling their Washington Post.
They want you to know all about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, they think this is an own somehow. Guys, according to you, the reason Jeff Bezos did this is because the Washington Post is not as valuable an asset to him as Blue Origin or as his AWS contract. So, like,
nowhere near.
He knows he's losing a little bit on the newspaper to protect his other interests, right? I mean, you don't get to be that rich without making those kinds of calculations on a daily basis.
He doesn't need the newspaper.
He doesn't need your $5 a month. He doesn't need Stephen King's $5 a month. That's not going to hurt him. He knew he would lose it, in fact. He did it anyway because that's business. And like I said, a lot of people have been sounding the alarm about this for a long time. You are late to the party once again.
Yeah, why the fuck do you think Jeff Bezos wanted to own a newspaper? Because he loves the news? He loves journalism? Yeah. To massage the brains of you fucking morons, which he has been doing for over a decade quite successfully, and now you found out who you're actually dealing with. In the end, he knows he's not going to lose most of you anyway. He's not going to lose most of you anyway because you're too used to checking in to the Washington Post for your cues on what you're supposed to think to present yourself as a good liberal who's has the illusion of being part of the ruling class that wouldn't fucking spit on you. You'll go back. Most of you will. Most of you will. Look at all these people. Oh, they were going to leave X. They're going to leave X. They're all on X complaining about X.
Right. Yep. I think you're right. I think most of them will come crawling back in the end.
Please clap.